lot of psychologists really distinguish between shame and guilt, and the easy way of saying it is shame is I'm bad and guilt is I did something bad or harmful. And they say that guilt is actually pro-social, and it's kind of beneficial in the sense that it motivates us to make amends, to repair, and so forth. Shame, it's interesting. I heard Paul Gilbert, who's a well-known compassion researcher and therapist in the UK, and I heard him once talk about the evolution of self-criticism. And I love his explanation, because another thing Kristen Neff says is our self-criticism is actually trying to help us. Sometimes we demonize that harsh inner critic, that voice. I know I always did. And then I heard her, and it was another epiphany for me. And then Paul Gilbert says that inner critic is trying to get us to fit in to our group. It's like monitoring our status. He says it really relates. And I think it's so important to think of evolutionary psychology with some of these emotions and some of these states. And he said, our inner critic is kind of determining where we fit in. So we'll avoid contempt attacks that will make us feel shame. So usually for our evolutionary past, for our entire life, we lived in groups of 50 or 100 people. So you figured out, where do you fit in the hierarchy? And we can think of primate troops. There's always a hierarchy, right? Or you can think of, my example is the middle school lunchroom. You come into the lunchroom with your tray, you're monitoring. You don't want to sit at the super cool kids table if you're not a super cool kid, because then you're going to be met with contempt and feel shame. So we're trying to avoid feeling shame. So our inner critic is actually trying to get us to belong, because that's such a fundamental need. Because again, in our evolutionary past, if we didn't belong, we'd die. We were exiled, right? So it's trying to help us. But if we can just see that, my inner critic, because now we're not living with 50 or 100 people. We're exposed to new people all the time. We're exposed to social media. Our self-critic is on overdrive because we're trying to evaluate ourselves in relation to others constantly in everybody's Instagram feed with their Photoshop, selfies and all of that. But to me, it made me make friends with that inner critic and say, thank you so much. You're trying to help me. I so appreciate it, but you can just take a break right now. I'm going to engage in some self-compassion, because what we don't want is to be stuck in shame. Shame is important too, if we do feel like it's an important thing we evolved for belonging, but short term, it's functional, but psychologists say we can get into trait shame either through our upbringing, for example, insecure attachment from our parents growing up, or systemic factors too. We could be shamed constantly by our culture because of our identity. So cultural, racial, ethnic, gender identity, and so forth, which keeps us stuck in trait shame, which is just this ongoing state, which there's nothing beneficial about being stuck in that state. And so I think, self-compassion can really heal some of that trait shame, and then that self-criticism that's just stuck on overdrive because of the way that we live now, which is so different from our evolutionary past, right?